Truck-kun was on a vacation from being the one-way ticket to an ice guy, so Train-kun had to play the teleport role in Haruko's life, unlike our fathers. He embarked on a useless journey of being a slum boy who rose to being a powerful success, but pretends to be ordinary with multiple cuties on his side. The story begins with a boy named Haruto, who is standing outside his family home. He is moving away from the suburbs to the city, but his childhood crush, Miharu, is deeply upset and cries, begging his useless self to stay. Haruto, however, tells her to stop crying and promises that when he's older, he'll remember her, come back, pre-order her, and they'll get married so he can protect her for the rest of his life. The scene shifts, showing a grown-up Haruto riding a bus on his way back from university. A young girl on the bus stares at him as he thinks about pre-ordering her. Suddenly, the bus shakes violently out of control. Out of nowhere, they are hit by Truck-kun, oh never mind, I mean Train-kun, and they're ice-guyed into another world. As this happens, Haruto flashes back to memories of the girl he pre-ordered in his childhood. Moments later, a smelly orphan boy named Ryo wakes up in a completely different world. He's sweaty and reeks of dirt, and upon waking, he experiences flashes of someone else's memories. He struggles to figure out who these memories belong to. At one point, his slow self even forgets his own name, calling himself Haruto. However, Ryo is confused, wondering who this Haruto guy is and why he's dreaming about him. He recalls being on a bus but doesn't even know what a bus is. Ryo also remembers having a grandfather who trained him in martial arts, but these memories blur together. Suddenly, 3 ugly men burst into the room where Ryo is resting and demand that he wakes up immediately. They're surprised that Ryo survived a terrible fever, even joking that they were ready to dig him a grave. One of the men places a brown sack in the corner before they sit down to eat. They tell Ryo to leave as his musty, ugly stench is making the food unbearable.
What do you mean by that?
Ryo, still smelly, heads outside to scavenge for fruit since no one is willing to feed him. He experiences more flashbacks of Haruto and starts piecing together that Haruto is a university student from Japan who was hit by a train while on a bus. Conflicted about who he really is, Ryo finally concludes that he's just a poor boy from the slums, nothing more. Although it isn't like he doesn't have a purpose, he has one burning desire, is to get revenge on the man who murdered his mother. In a flashback, Ryo remembers his mother telling him about visiting his grandparents' kingdom. She had promised to take him to her homeland when he grew older, but that dream was shattered when a savage assassin took her life. Ever since that day, Ryo has lived solely to avenge her death. While reflecting on these painful memories, a group of snobby noble girls, as one was nice, approaches Ryo, asking if he's seen a bubbly, purple-haired girl who has gone missing. Ryo, still smelling worse than most anime fans, replies that he hasn't seen anyone like that. The noble girls stay far away, offended by his odor, and one of them, Vanessa, is particularly rude. Ryo snaps back, but another girl, Celia, apologizes for Vanessa's behavior and asks Ryo more politely if he's seen or heard of anything related to the missing girl. Ryo tells her no and advises the ladies not to venture into the slums, warning them that their fine clothes could invite danger. The girls decide to change clothes before heading into the slums. But before they leave, Celia casts a magic detection spell to see if the purple-haired girl is nearby. They don't detect their friend, but they do sense magic coming from within Ryo. Girls assume the missing girl is in the slums and leave, thanking Ryo for his help and leaving him behind. Just before leaving, Celia gives Ryo a bag of silver coins, so many that he can't even count them. He wears the bag around his neck like a pendant and rushes home to share the news with the others. However, as soon as Ryo steps into the yard, a masked assassin tries to stab him, but the blade hits the bag of coins, saving his life. In this moment, a terrified Ryo cowers in a corner, bracing for the assassin to kill him. But suddenly, a mysterious pink-haired spirit appears, calling him by his Japanese name, Haruto. Our boy already has one hell of a baddie by his side. She quickly explains the basics of magical combat and tells him he has the power to defend himself. With Haruto's memories helping him, Ryo instinctively recalls his martial arts training from his past life. He uses these techniques to fight the assassin. Though the assassin wields strong magic, Ryo surprises himself by landing a powerful kick that disarms his attacker. The assassin, calling Ryo a disgusting slum rat, attempts a final blow, but Ryo taps into his magical abilities and finishes the fight, eliminating the assassin. Upon searching the room, he hears rustling from the brown sack left behind earlier. Inside, Ryo finds the purple-haired girl, Princess Flora, the very girl Celia and her friends were looking for. She tells Ryo she was captured for ransom and begs him to help her return to the castle, promising him a great reward if he does. As they make their way outside, the other nobles spot Ryo carrying Princess Flora. They immediately assume the worst, accusing him of kidnapping her. They call him names and arrest him, ignoring his attempts to explain the situation. Just your average women, nothing new. Since he's just a common boy from the slums, they take him to the castle to face justice. Ryo is taken into custody by the king's guards, where he meets an evil nobleman named Charles. Charles despises people from the slums and takes great pleasure in humiliating Ryo. Despite Ryo's protests of innocence, Charles brutally beats him, battering him with a wooden stick until Ryo can't take it anymore. Meanwhile, Princess Flora awakens, and when she learns that Ryo is being punished, she insists that he is not to blame and demands that he be brought to her immediately. Celia, upon hearing this, rushes to the dungeon, where she finds Ryo barely alive. She scolds Charles for disobeying orders, and he reluctantly lets Ryo go. Celia then heals Ryo with magic and apologizes for what happened. Ryo wakes up in a bed in the Beltram Kingdom, greeted once again by Celia. He asks what will happen to him now, and she informs him that the king wishes to meet him personally to thank him. Ryo is stunned but nervous, not knowing how to properly address royalty. Celia offers to help him prepare, teaching him the proper manners and customs for meeting the king. After a quick lesson in royal etiquette, Ryo is ready to face the king, sporting a fresh haircut. Our boy looking slick. Ryo earns admission into the Beltram Royal Academy of Magic, though Celia warns him that most of the students come from privileged backgrounds, so he'll likely be bullied. Ryo, however, says he doesn't mind as he's aware of his status. Celia then opens the door to his new class, signaling the start of his new life. When he's introduced as a student from the slums, the class begins murmuring. They're disgusted that someone from the impoverished districts would be in their presence. Despite their reservations, Ryo's admission was personally seen to by the king as thanks for saving Princess Flora. Even with this royal backing, Ryo's reception in class is cold, and his illiteracy makes matters worse. Later, after class, Ryo visits Celia's faculty room for the private tutoring she promised him. The room is filled with complex textbooks and scrolls. Although Celia is only 12 years old, her intelligence has made her a respected professor. It's a reminder that no matter how talented you are, there's always someone better. Celia is impressed by how quickly Ryo grasps arithmetic, though it's no surprise given that he has Haruto's college-level education in his memories. While they are having tea, Celia asks about his first day. Ryo says it went well if you overlook the discrimination. The next day, Ryo participates in a martial arts class. The instructor, noticing Ryo's firm grasp of combat, invites him to a duel. Ryo's unconventional stance draws ridicule from his classmates, but the instructor forms a different opinion. Using Haruto's kendo training, Ryo holds his own in the duel, earning his instructor's respect. The instructor invites him to join the Royal Knights, but Ryo declines as he has other priorities. Later, Celia finds Ryo studying diligently for the upcoming end-of-term exams. Although she advises him not to stress too much about his grades, Ryo decides to do the opposite. A few days later, Celia administers the exams. While Ryo's classmates struggle, he easily completes the questions. After the exams, Ryo feels a little drained, but things take a turn when Haruto's memories of Miharu, his childhood crush, come flooding back. He remembers how they drifted apart after reuniting, which leaves him momentarily melancholic. When the results are posted, Ryo tops the class, tying for first place with Christina, while her childhood friend Rona comes in third. Alphonse, a nobleman who has been behind much of the bullying, accuses Ryo of cheating. However, Christina and Rona accept the results, and Celia vouches for Ryo's hard work. Alphonse and his little boy gang refuse to listen and storm off, flicking their hair dramatically as they go. Celia congratulates Ryo, though she warns that others may use his success against him. Ryo doesn't mind if Celia continues to support him, which she promises to do by offering her bosoms for support if Ryo wanted to. They are also the perfect height for Ryo to do some motorboating whenever he desires to. 5 years later, Ryo is one of the students chosen to participate in the prestigious Royal Exhibition tournament. To everyone's surprise, Alphonse protests Ryo's selection, as he still sees Ryo as a commoner unworthy of such a prestigious position. The instructor shuts him down, stating the decision has already been made. Celia congratulates Ryo on being chosen and notes that a knight's order might recruit him if a scout is impressed. However, Ryo insists he has no plans to join the Knights. Celia, while sipping her tea, asks what he intends to do after graduating. Ryo reveals that he plans to go on a journey. Celia is saddened by this, as she hoped he would stay and work in her laboratory, where he has already improved her quality of life with his skill in making tea. Looks like someone is in love. Ryo tells her that she'll soon be entering marriage talks, as is expected for someone of her status, and it wouldn't be appropriate for a male commoner to work for her. When asked where he plans to go, Ryo says he wants to visit Yagumo, his mother's homeland. His mention of his mother makes Celia worry as Rio seems momentarily lost in thought. A few weeks later, the Royal Exhibition tournament begins. The first match is between Rio and Charles, the man who brutally beat Rio 5 years ago. Charles is shocked that the smelly orphan he tormented has now become his opponent, while Rio sarcastically thanks him for treating him so kindly back then. As the fight begins, Rio's unconventional stance confuses Charles, but Alfred, overseeing the match, takes note of Rio's strange movements. Charles, insulted that Rio isn't using a shield, charges in. But Rio uses his agility and Haruto's techniques to gain the upper hand. Eventually, Rio finds an opening and disarms Charles, securing victory. Charles throws a fit like a crybaby and demands a rematch. However, after being hammered some sense into him by Alfred, Charles accepts his defeat. Later, Charles drowns his sorrows in alcohol with Rias, an ambassador from the Proxia Empire. Rias admits that Rio's movements were impressive, but Charles, still bitter, tells him of Rio's suspected involvement in Flora's kidnapping 5 years ago. The next day, Celia waits by the school gate to celebrate Rio's victory, but she notices him sneaking behind the school. Curious, she follows him and is surprised to witness a girl confessing her feelings to Rio. Although it seems a bit weird that she is developing some type of feelings for him, it still has to hurt. Celia tries to keep her mind off what she saw, Rio being confessed to, by focusing on his uncertain post-graduation plans. Later, Celia conducts a lecture on magic control, specifically using lightning magic. Alphonse jeers, claiming the lesson is beneath their class and taunts Rio for being incapable of magic. Unfazed, Celia asks Alphonse and Stuart to demonstrate the lightning spell for her. They comply, showing off their crude lightning magic. Celia, unimpressed, closes the blinds and casts multiple lightning spells at once. The lightning dances around the room gracefully before gently exploding into a brilliant shower of light. While Rio can't use magic formulas like they can, he can recreate spells he witnesses using his abundant mana. This is some sort of special power that only he can use. After the lecture, Stuart praises Celia for her display but turns to berate Rio, accusing him of attracting the attention of half the female students. Sounds like someone is jealous that he can't attract that many girls. Stuart tries to intimidate Rio into stopping attracting the females, but no man can stop his own natural riz. Celia vouches for Rio's integrity and tells Stuart to drop it. Later, the class participates in an outdoor practicum exam, with Alphonse acting as the unit commander. They are tasked with traversing a forest and reaching the goal by sundown. Thanks to his father's connections, Alphonse has prepared a secret route to ensure their success. Rona disapproves, feeling it's akin to cheating, but Christina lets Alphonse do as he wishes. Stuart, as usual, has a trick prepared for Rio, assigning him to carry their luggage. Flora offers to help, but Rio refuses, carrying all the load by himself. As they make their way through the forest, they encounter a group of goblins. Despite being arrogant, Alphonse proves to be a competent commander, instructing the vanguard to use physical augmentation and leading them to defeat the weaker goblins. Meanwhile, Rio, who has been spacing out, suddenly becomes alert. Rias, hiding behind the trees, is impressed that Rio noticed his presence and decides to test the young man. Alphonse leads the group down the secret route only to find themselves at a dead end. A cliff blocks their path. Turning back would take too long, and before Alphonse can think of a solution, they are ambushed by a trio of orcs. The orcs throw spears at the group, and in the chaos, Stuart is injured in the leg. Panicking, he bumps into Flora, causing her to fall off the cliff. Without hesitation, Rio jumps in after her and manages to save her, though he ends up falling himself. What a simp, to be honest. Alphonse manages to rally the group, and together they fend off the orcs. Meanwhile, Rio is unharmed from his fall. Alphonse tries to assess what happened, but Stuart denies any wrongdoing and accuses Rio of pushing him, and because of that he bumped into Flora. Watching the drama from the bushes, Rio decides to leave the country altogether and go on his journey early. The group decides to retreat without looking for Rio, however Princess Flora decides that she won't go back without looking for her savior. Suddenly, the group hears a terrifying roar as a giant minotaur descends from the skies. Christina's Thunderball spell proves ineffective, so Alphonse orders the group to switch to Ice Lance and takes command of the battle. Despite his efforts, the vanguard crumbles under the Minotaur's strength, and Alphonse orders a retreat. Christina and Rona flee, assuming Flora had already evacuated. But in truth, she stayed behind to treat one of the injured students from the vanguard. The Minotaur approaches Flora, and just as it seems she will be harmed, Rio appears and slices the monster's hand off. Our boy just can't help himself from intervening in shit like this. He tells Flora to escape and then engages the towering beast in battle. Using his odd powers, Rio proves to be more than a match for the Minotaur. Seizing an opportunity when the creature exposes a weakness, Rio swiftly beheads it. A few students return to retrieve Flora, but Rio uses the distraction to slip away unnoticed. Rias, who had been observing the fight, identifies Rio as a descendant of Yagumo based on his black hair and eyes. Meanwhile, Celia overhears a conversation between the headmaster and Duke Gustave. The headmaster, though aware that Rio's disappearance is due to Gustave's son, cannot afford to hold the nobility accountable, as the kingdom is at an all-time low and needs their support. As a result, Rio is blamed for the incident, despite the truth. Celia anxiously awaits news of Rio, but to her relief, he shows up unexpectedly. Their reunion is brief, as Rio thanks Celia for all her support over the years. He tells her that without her, he wouldn't have survived the Academy's hostile environment. He promises to write to her under the alias Haruto. Before parting, the two embrace, and Celia reassures him that she will eagerly await his letters. As Rio walks away, she reminisces about the time they spent together and the bond they formed over the years. Rio takes one last look at the kingdom before departing for Yagumo. Meanwhile, Duke Gustave brings one of Rio's cloaks to a beastkin assassin named Latifa and instructs her to track him down using the cloak and kill him. Rio flies out of the gate, and in 3 days, he reaches Amond, a market town in the kingdom of Galar. Fortunately, his wanted posters haven't reached the town, letting him secure the supplies he needs without any issues. Rio senses someone following him but thinks he's just being paranoid, brushing it off as nothing. While wandering through the city, Rio's attention is caught by a street vendor selling a pasta dish that he claims was introduced by the local ruler, Lizat. After eating and regaining his strength, the vendor directs him to the merchant guild, mentioning there's a food stall right in front of its doors. Rio enters the guild and meets a receptionist named Lee, who takes note of his black hair. She assists him in selecting preserved foods for his journey, our boy casually rizzing up another hottie. Later, Law brings his supplies to a waiting room, where she finds his familiarity with tea and teawares intriguing. Before Rio leaves, he writes a letter to Celia, telling her that he won't be able to write any more letters once he leaves the region. With a heavy pack of supplies, Rio sets out, and Lee sees him off. A receptionist named Code addresses Lee as Lizat, and Lizat reminds her that she's using an alias for now. While trekking through a forest, Rio stumbles upon an injured figure lying in the middle of the road. Lured into a false sense of security, he approaches to help the person, only to be attacked with poison needles. That's the last time Rio allows himself to act so selflessly. Latifa, the attacker, draws a dagger with the intention of killing him, though both are surprised by the other's speed. When Latifa casts a physical enhancement spell, Rio is forced to turn things up a notch himself. Noticing that Latifa is too fixated on her knives, Rio shifts to using his fists, managing to knock her out of the air and pin her to the ground. Latifa reacts hysterically, thinking Rio wants to her. This forces Rio to cast a weak sleep spell to calm her down. Noticing the collar around her neck, Rio identifies it as a slave collar and dispels it. Latifa is then revealed to be the girl who died alongside Rio in a traffic accident, named Endo. Apparently, everyone involved in that accident was reincarnated into this world. Train-kun did its job quite spectacularly. Latifa is the slave of Stuart, Rio's classmate, who forces her to call him older brother through the use of an obedience collar, which subjects her to immense physical pain if she disobeys. When Latifa regains consciousness, she is wary and fearful of Rio, but upon realizing that he removed her collar, she starts crying tears of joy and relief. Rio interrogates her, learning that she's associated with Stuart and that there are likely no other pursuers. After confirming that Latifa no longer intends to harm him, Rio frees her from her bindings. However, even though she's free now, Rio knows that in this region, beastkin like Latifa are often captured and made into slaves. He tells her to head east toward a large area known as the Wilderness, where other demi-humans live. Coincidentally, Rio is heading in the same direction. Rio tries to leave her behind, but Latifa starts following him. Our boy just casually got a cute hick as her pet. Rio clarifies that he didn't free her because he's a good person. Killing her would just make things troublesome. Though she was forced to attack him, Rio doesn't trust her enough to journey with her. With tear-filled eyes, Latifa offers Rio her slave collar so she can be obedient to him, admitting that even though she hates being a slave, she hates being alone more. Rio relents and allows her to accompany him, though he asks her to throw away the collar. Latifa joins Rio on his journey to the east. While camping, Latifa begins crying when she finally has her first real meal in ages. As they travel through rugged terrain, Rio decides to camp early one night after seeing that Latifa is tired. Meanwhile, Celia receives Rio's letter. Although she's sad that she won't be hearing from him for a while, she's glad that he's alive and well. While camping, Rio is surprised to find that Latifa is familiar with the concept of spaghetti. She also seems accustomed to eating it. Rio begins to suspect that Latifa is just like him, someone who reincarnated into this world. His suspicions are confirmed when he overhears her having a nightmare, crying out in her sleep that she wants to go back to Tokyo. The next morning, Latifa wakes up first and notices that Rio looks a lot like the boy she saw on the bus. When Rio wakes, Latifa asks him if she can start calling him older brother, and he agrees, hoping this small comfort will help her. Their journey continues across barren wastelands, jagged valleys, volcanic regions, frozen landscapes, and lush grasslands, basically the entire range of environments, like something out of a Pokémon mystery dungeon game. Rio spots a large tree in the distance, though strangely, Latifa can't see it. Rio takes this to mean that the tree is being magically concealed from others. As they camp within the forest grounds near the tree, Rio eases Latifa's suffering by removing her nightmares. When he notices the campfire outside dying out, he encounters a wolf that suddenly glows with a blinding white light. Rio's sight is suddenly taken away, and he finds himself surrounded by 4 demi-human girls: Yuzuma, a harpy; Sarah, a wolfwoman; Alma, a dwarf; and Oria, a high elf. Rio tries to reason with them, but the girls are naturally distrustful of humans. Sarah convinces the others to at least listen to him. As Rio explains his situation, Oria and Alma discover Latifa inside his tent, deeply asleep due to a sleeping spell. Yuzuma, certain that Rio has kidnapped one of their own, attacks him. Rio literally has a young girl sleeping beside him in a tent, so yeah, he definitely not beating them allegations.
You got me.
Despite Rio's attempts to clarify the misunderstanding, the girls notice that Rio is using some form of spirit art. Alma, seizing the opportunity, uses an earth spell to restrain Rio's movements, and Yuzuma knocks him unconscious with a taser-like strike. While unconscious, Rio drifts into a dreamlike state, where he encounters the mysterious woman who originally taught him to harness the magical power flowing through his veins. Their time together is brief, but the woman hopes Rio at least enjoys sweet dreams. When he awakens, he finds himself shackled. Latifa rushes into the room, overjoyed to see Rio finally awake. Angrily, she turns to the 4 demi-human girls, demanding to know if they were responsible for hurting Rio. At that moment, Ursula, one of the village leaders, enters the room and apologizes to Rio for the mistreatment he suffered. Yuzuma and the other girls kneel before him, offering their apologies as well. Ursula reassures Rio that Yuzuma and the others will be punished accordingly. Oria frees him from his shackles, and Ursula informs Rio that the other elders of the village will offer formal apologies the next morning. For the moment, the best they can do is offer him the room he's currently in for the night. The following morning, Ursula guides Rio toward the Hall of the Elders. Along the way, Rio once again notices the large tree in the distance. Ursula explains that it is the World Tree, where a mighty spirit named Diaz resides. Typically, only those with keen spiritual senses can see the tree, so Ursula is intrigued that Rio can perceive it. When they arrive, Rio meets 2 more village elders, Sora, an elf, and Dominic, a dwarf. They both apologize for how he was treated and thank him for freeing Latifa, one of their own. In gratitude, they offer to grant Rio any desire within their power. Rio asks only that they take in Latifa, but since she seems so attached to him, he also requests permission to stay in the village for a while. The elders unanimously agree, and Dominic even jokes that Rio could marry one of the village girls if he wishes. Not gonna lie, even I am starting to get a little jealous now. Finally, Rio requests to be taught the spiritual arts and any techniques that could be useful in daily life. Suddenly, the village's guardian deity and the spirit of the World Tree, Dryas, makes a dramatic appearance in all her divine glory. She inspects Rio closely and discovers a dormant spirit hidden within him, which she explains is preventing him from using magic like a normal human. Rio is familiar with this limitation, but Dryas is intrigued and takes a closer look. To her surprise, the dormant spirit is human-shaped, a form of spirit that was thought to be almost entirely wiped out during a divine war 1,000 years ago. Dryas reveals that these human-shaped spirits, like her, are considered second-class spirits, a status rarely seen anymore. This revelation causes the village elders to rethink how they treat Rio, as he now holds the same standing as a saint or a person of significant honor within their society. This effectively grants him VIP status in the village, a position of high respect and privilege. After the meeting, Oria brings Rio to his new home, where Latifa and the 4 girls are already waiting for him. To his surprise, the village has access to a rice-like food, which the girls explain originates from the Yagumo region. Later, Rio is further shocked to learn that Oria, Yuzuma, Sarah, and Alma will be living with him from now on. Ursula appears and explains that this arrangement is intended to help Latifa form relationships with people other than Rio. Though surprised, Rio agrees, acknowledging that it's for the best. Days and weeks begin to pass by in a blur. Rio spends his time learning spiritual arts from the village elders while bonding with his new companions and adapting to a peaceful life in the countryside. In time, a grand spirit festival is held to honor the world tree, and Rio takes part in the celebration. Meanwhile, Ruse, an unwitting adventurer, embarks on a daring quest to retrieve a mysterious egg from the depths of a cave. Ruse explains that the egg will augment the military strength of his Celestial Lion Brigade. As he and his party fly away with the egg in hand, a massive black creature begins to follow them. An entire year has passed since Rio and Latifa have been living in the village. To formalize their residency, both receive a ceremonial kiss from Lady Dryas. Once the ceremony concludes, Dominic announces the start of a grand feast. The dwarves, known for their dual identities as either blacksmiths or drunks, are in full celebration mode. As the party goes on, Oria and the other girls complain to Rio that he always keeps his guard up, even though he seems close to Latifa. They want to be close friends with him too, or maybe more than just friends. Lucky dude. Rio smiles, finally opening up to them and welcoming their friendship. As the girls head off to get more alcohol to share, Rio quietly speaks to Ursula about his plan to leave the village, so much for his new friendships. Meanwhile, Ruse leaves one of his companions behind to scout the area, handing him a mysterious red pill which the companion immediately swallows. Ruse ascends into the sky, spotting black wyverns flying in the distance. Later that night, Rio and Latifa take a late-night stroll. He asks her if she enjoys living in the village, to which she responds that she does. Oria, the other girls, and Ursula have all been kind to her, but above all, Rio is there. Not for much longer, though. Rio tells Latifa that he plans to leave the village to continue his journey to Yagumo. Latifa, upset and desperate, insists on going with him, but Rio warns her of the unknown dangers that lie ahead. Angry, Latifa runs off. While Latifa is storming away, the village elders gather to discuss sightings of several black wyverns in the area. At the same time, Ruse infiltrates the wyverns' den, beginning to steal their eggs. Sarah and the other girls take to the skies to survey the area and soon spot a young adventurer camping near a watering hole with a griffin. They swoop down to interrogate him. Sarah orders the group not to provoke a fight without her command. But when they notice that the adventurer is carrying an egg in a sling across his chest, they become gravely concerned. The adventurer, realizing he's been caught, flees on his griffin, prompting Sarah to order his capture by force if necessary. Yuzuma shoots quick thunderbolts at him, but the griffin deftly dodges. However, neither griffin nor rider can evade the wyvern when it arrives on the scene. Sarah and the others realize that the egg the adventurer carried is actually a wyvern egg. Sarah immediately pursues the wyvern before it can reach the village and orders a harpy to inform the elders of this new development. Meanwhile, Ruse finishes stealing the rest of the wyvern eggs and, seeing his role as the adventurer concluded, crushes a small red gem, killing the adventurer instantly. The griffin plummets to the ground along with the egg, and Sarah commands Alma to chase after the wyvern as she lands her wolf mount. On the ground, Latifa is agonizing over Rio's decision to leave her when she sees something fall from the sky. Rushing over, she finds a dead body and a shattered egg. At that moment, the black wyvern lands in front of her. When the creature sees its child dead from the fall, it releases a devastating roar of grief and fury. Rio, meanwhile, returns to the village and finds Dominic organizing evacuation efforts. Dominic tells him that the festival has been cancelled due to the wyvern threat. Hearing Latifa's voice in the distance, Rio sprints toward the forest to find her. Latifa, trapped by the wyvern's fury, is saved by Alma, who deflects the wyvern's flame breath and counterattacks. Alma summons her spirit animal, Eppa, and together with her wolf, they engage the wyvern. Despite their efforts, Alma's attacks prove ineffective, and the battle becomes one of endurance as Alma holds off the wyvern long enough for the village to finish evacuating. Latifa tries to distract the wyvern but is pinned down by a massive log. The creature prepares to strike her, but at the last moment, Rio swoops in, rescuing Latifa and carrying her to safety. He returns to the battle, this time fighting the wyvern with his bare hands. The wyvern attempts to unleash another devastating flame attack, but Rio fires a bolt of energy straight into its throat, causing the blast to backfire. He then pummels the beast from above, delivering crushing blows that rattle its brain and ultimately kill it. Poor Birdie's brain got fried. Alma is left speechless, unable to believe that Rio defeated the wyvern so easily, and with his bare hands no less. Witnessing this, the remaining wyverns retreat. Sarah and the others arrive on the scene, and Alma tells them how Rio single-handedly took down the wyvern. Sarah remarks that wyverns are cautious creatures. If they sense that an enemy is too powerful, they won't engage. The next morning, Latifa tearfully apologizes to Rio for her behavior the night before. She admits that she has become dependent on him, always seeing him as her older brother, aside from the time she tried to kill him, of course. Rio finally opens up, telling her why he's determined to travel to Yagumo. In return, Latifa reveals her own secret. She had died once and originally came from a land called Japan. To her surprise, Rio confides that he's the same, another reincarnation from Japan. What a remarkable coincidence, two Japanese people finding themselves reincarnated in the same world at the same time and place. Latifa promises to wait for him until the day he returns. The elders and Ryo's friends gather to see him off. They gift him a mithril sword and a coat of armor made from the wyvern's skin, giving him a look reminiscent of a bargain bin Kirito. They also provide sacks of supplies, along with a space-time cache, because no Isekai story is complete without some dimensional storage. Ryo promises to return if the village ever faces mortal danger. He says his heartfelt goodbyes, especially to Latifa, whom he considers his little sister. With that, he flies off into the sky, beginning the next chapter of his journey. 2 weeks have passed since Ryo arrived in the Yagumo region, which suspiciously resembles Japan, but he has yet to find any clues about his parents. He asks two young girls, Ruri and Seo, to take him to their village leader. They bring Ryo to the village elder, Yuba, who agrees to sit down and talk with him. Ryo explains that his parents lived in the area over 15 years ago. However, when Ryo mentions his parents' names, Zen and Ayam, Yuba dismisses Ruri and Seo, wanting to speak to him privately. Ryo recounts his memories with his mother and his journey to Yagumo, which confirms what Yuba needs to hear. She reveals that Zen was her son, making her Ryo's grandmother. Shocked but grateful, Ryo expresses his desire to give his parents a proper burial. However, Yuba explains that they already have graves set up for them, created shortly after his parents left the village for reasons she cannot reveal. She brings Ryo to the headstones, and after spending some time by his parents' graves, she invites him to live with her and his cousin Ruri. Ryo agrees. The next morning, Ryo is up early. Ruri, forgetting a boy is now in the house, exits her room looking all naked and sexy. Ryo helps them prepare breakfast, impressing them with his use of spiritual arts to heat water for the miso soup. Seo and her older brother Shin join them for breakfast, with Shin eyeing Ryo suspiciously at first. But like most men, Shin warms up to Ryo once he tastes how good his cooking is. After breakfast, Yuba asks Shin to take Ryo to the hunter, Dola, as she wants him to train as a hunter. Shin, underestimating Ryo's abilities, reluctantly agrees. Ryo accompanies Shin to meet Dola, the hunt master. While Ryo's arrows consistently hit their targets, Shin struggles to hunt a single animal. After the hunt, Shin sulks and storms off. Seeing how dirty he's become, Ryo decides to make a bath for himself since the village doesn't have one. When Ruri and Seo stumble upon the strange structure, Ryo explains that it's a bath. Ruri attempts to flirt with Ryo, not knowing he is her cousin. She even playfully teases Seo by pushing her toward him so she can catch a whiff of how clean he smells. Later, Shin and his friends find out what Ryo has done and assume he's trying to impress the locals. They behave rudely, but Ruri and Seo come to Ryo's defense, forcing Shin to back off. As days pass, Ryo continues to help with various village chores, unintentionally drawing the admiration of the village girls and the annoyance of Shin. One day, Yuba asks Ryo if he can guard a shipment of rice to the capital, and he agrees. Suddenly, they hear a commotion brewing. Shin has gotten into a fight with Gon, the son of a chief from the neighboring village. Gon had waltzed into the bath, explaining that he was on his way to trade goods in the capital, but his cart broke down and it would take time to repair. Gon asks to stay with Ruri in the meantime, hinting that the two are expected to marry in the future, given that they are heirs to their respective villages. Gon also puts his dirty sight on Seo, exclaiming that she is a fine piece of beauty. Furious, Shin tries to defend his sister's honor by throwing a punch, but Gon easily overpowers him. Yuba arrives, putting an end to the altercation. She allows Gon to stay but confines him to a spare house on the edge of the village, forbidding him from leaving. As Gon walks away, he attempts to kick Ryo, but trips over himself instead. Too bad no one saw it. Shin later asks Yuba if Seo can stay with her for safety, and Yuba agrees. That evening, Ryo gives Seo a beautiful protective amulet to keep her safe. Meanwhile, Gon and his men plot something sinister. The next morning, Ryo joins Yuba in welcoming Haid, the region's chief tax collector, who has come to inspect their harvest. After showing him around and treating him to a hearty dinner, Ryo trains outside the bath. Ruri and Seo approach him, curious about his martial arts training. Ryo reveals that he took up martial arts to protect a girl he loved long ago. He then exits the bath and urges Ruri and Seo to bathe before the weather turns cold. That night, Gon infiltrates Yuba's house and attempts to assault Ruri. Fortunately, the protective charm Ryo gave her alerts him to the attack. Ryo arrives just in time, and when Gon attacks him, Ryo easily flings him outside, stepping on his throat and beating him within an inch of his life. Haid finally shows up and takes Gon into custody. Ryo calms down, concerned that his psyche is becoming more mixed with Haruto, his past self. The following morning, Haid informs the village that Gon will be arrested. Ryo apologizes for losing control the previous night, but Ruri and Seo are just relieved that he was so quick to protect them. With breakfast time approaching, Height prepares to leave, taking Gon along as a prisoner. Yuba hands him a letter to deliver to his father, Guoki. Height promises to do everything in his power to hand over the letter to his father. After making the final preparations, Height, Ryo, and a few other villagers set off for the capital of the kingdom of Karasuki. Meanwhile, Dola settles the other men from the village into an inn and then asks Ryo and Shin to accompany him to the constabulary to witness Gon being led away in chains. Shin feels that Gon got off too easily and admits that, in his mind, Gon deserved to die for his actions. However, he thanks Ryo for protecting the honor of his little sister when he was too powerless to do so. Afterward, Dola treats them to a meal of katten, a delicious noodle-based dish that looks a lot like ramen. Ryo instantly falls in love with it, much to Dola and Shin's delight. Later, Shin expresses his gratitude to Ryo for saving his sister during Gon's attack, and then it suddenly occurs to him that she should try some of the katten as well. The following day, at Shin's urging, Seo joins Ryo on a shopping trip, during which he invites her to try the katten. A crafty street merchant entices them to pick out a souvenir, and Seo chooses a pink flower hair ornament. Ryo offers to pay full price for the ornament even though Seo is hesitant for him to pay for it. Before they leave, the merchant quietly advises Seo to do everything she can to win Ryo over, predicting that he will be very popular and every girl will try to win him for herself. As they walk along, Ryo saves a young noblewoman named Kimomo from a dangerous situation, where a kidnapper is trying to kidnap her. Her attendant thanks him and takes Kimomo off his hands. Shortly after, soldiers arrive to respond to the disturbance, prompting Ryo to grab Seo's hand and flee. He really doesn't like coming into the limelight. Meanwhile, Guoki tells his son that Kimomo narrowly avoided being kidnapped, thanks to a mysterious stranger. Height delivers the letter from Yuba, and the contents leave Guoki visibly shocked, likening it to one of those eye-catching BuzzFeed Top 10 articles. Wonder what the letter contained? Maybe it was a blackmail letter from Lady Yuba, who likely had wrong relations with Guoki. Who knows? When Ryo and Seo return home, some of the men can't help but smirk at the sight of the pink flower ornament adorning Seo's hair. Seo also blushes and Shin sees his little sister getting flirted on by Ryo in front of him. Before Ryo can go inside, he is visited by Guoki, who asks to speak with him. Introduced to Guoki and his wife Koko, Ryo learns that they once served as attendants to his mother, Karasuki Iam, who was the daughter of the current king of the Karasuki Kingdom. Ryo is, in fact, the son of royalty and the grandson of the king of Karasuki Kingdom. Suck it, Alphonse and Stuart and other noble bullies of Ryo's school life. 2 decades ago, the kingdom of Karasuki had been at war with the neighboring kingdom of Rurin. Zen, a skilled soldier, had dueled with Guoki, and Guoki, impressed, had recommended Zen to become a bodyguard for the royal family. Zen and the young Iam soon fell in love. However, during peace talks with Rurin, an ambassador became infatuated with Iam and plotted to abduct her. Zen thwarted the scheme, but the ambassador, furious over his failure, demanded a political marriage with Iam and called for Zen's execution. To avoid escalating tensions, Zen and Iam fled the kingdom on the king's orders and lived together, having the kid named Ryo. Upon seeing Ryo, Guoki becomes certain that he is the son of Zen and Iam. He asks Ryo to accompany him to the castle to meet the current king and queen, his grandparents. The following day, Ryo meets King Hamura and Queen Shizuku, who are revealed to be his grandparents. They ask about Zen and Iam, and Ryo shares everything he knows. He recounts how his father passed away under mysterious circumstances when he was young, and his mother was tragically killed before his eyes. Despite her death, Iam had always shown strength, hiding her sorrow from Ryo. Ryo further explains how Lucius, an adventurer and family friend, suddenly appeared one day and force-fed Ryo a potion. When Iam confronted him, Lucius silenced her by taking her life. Left alone, Ryo was abandoned in the slums, where he grew up in isolation. His fortunes shifted when he rescued Princess Flora and was granted the opportunity to attend a prestigious academy. Though it was a challenging experience, Ryo looks back on his time at the academy with a sense of accomplishment. Hamura inquiries about Ryo's intentions concerning Lucius, and without hesitation, Ryo vows to find him and exact revenge. Though Hamura warns him that the path of revenge is fraught with pain, Ryo remains resolute. Before giving his blessing, Hamura asks Ryo to duel Guoki, one of the most formidable warriors in the region. Later, Ryo accompanies Guoki to his home, where one of their attendants, Ai, recognizes Ryo as the man who saved Kimomo. The duel begins, and Guoki quickly realizes that Ryo's combat style is both fierce and unpredictable. In a desperate attempt, Guoki employs one of his secret techniques, Wind Slash, but Ryo counters with a powerful torrent of water, overwhelming him completely. With his sword aimed at Guoki's throat, Ryo emerges victorious.
すごいお方です。
Hamura, witnessing Ryo's skill, decides there is no need for further training under Guoki. Returning to the village, Ryo visits his parents' graves one last time. Standing before them, he silently vows to move forward without looking back. Ryo reveals his royal heritage to Ruri, how his father married the princess of the kingdom and how he came to be. Lady Yuba also attests to his claim. Ruri immediately begins addressing him with formal respect. However, Ryo asks her to speak to him the way she always has, in her usual playful and cheeky manner. Looks like he likes his girls jolly around him.
Yes, I do.
He then informs Ruri and Yuba of his plans to return to his home country next year, but not before stopping by a special place first. Ruri warmly tells him that he's always welcome to return. When they ask if someone is waiting for him back home, Ryo mentions a certain girl who treats him like an older brother. The following day, Ryo visits the sewing house to greet everyone, and the other girls grow envious when they realize he and Ruri are on a first-name basis. They demand that Ryo also call them from their first name. However, Ryo has that stuff privileged for special people in his life, not random girlies from the sewing house. Time seems to fly as Ryo enjoys his carefree days in the village, which he has come to consider his third home. My boy creating homes everywhere he goes. While overseeing Ruri's rice planting, Dola teases Ryo, suggesting that Ruri would make a good wife. As the days pass, Ryo checks on Seo's progress and tells her that he will be leaving after the upcoming harvest festival. Seo tries to hide her tears, pretending something is stuck in her eye, but when she returns home, she collapses in sorrow. Seeing her in distress, Shin assumes Ryo has upset her. But Seo explains that it's because Ryo plans to leave the village. Determined, Shin marches over to Ryo's house, prostrating himself in a plea for Ryo to stay. Seo follows her brother, apologizing for his actions, and together they lay the matter to rest. When Ruri returns later, she senses tension in the air and asks if something has happened. But Yuba assures her it's nothing significant. As time passes, both the rice and Seo grow, with Seo secretly training in spiritual arts and combat techniques, preparing for an unknown challenge. Months later, the village holds its annual harvest festival. Guoki, shirtless and confident, challenges any man brave enough to face him in the ring. Amidst the festivities, a group of villagers push Dola into taking up the challenge. Meanwhile, Ryo helps Ruri and Kimomo prepare the kamen. At some point, Seo pulls Ryo aside, asking to speak with him in private. She leads him into the nearby forest, where she goes in for a passionate kiss before he leaves the village. Just kidding, Seo is not that kind of baddie, and she confesses her love for him like a good girl. Sadly, Ryo is unable to return her feelings and apologizes sincerely, as he had already promised his love to some unknown girl in his previous world, who moved on and got on with another random guy. What a simp Ryo actually is. Seo, in desperation, asks him to let her accompany him on his journey, explaining that she has trained hard not to be a burden. Although he respects her efforts, Ryo stands firm, refusing to change his mind or allow her to join him. After the emotional conversation, Ryo walks away, silently apologizing to Shin, who had been secretly listening nearby. Early the next morning, before the sun rises, Ryo sets out on his journey. Ruri and Yuba see him off, warmly inviting him to return whenever he wishes. As Ryo approaches the village gate, he spots Seo standing nearby. In a flashback, Guoki had asked Seo if her love for Ryo was strong enough to leave behind the village she grew up in. Although she hesitated, Seo ultimately declared that her feelings for Ryo were indeed strong enough for her to make that sacrifice. Seo bids Ryo a bittersweet farewell, waving goodbye, while Shin, too, waves from the background, so far away that his face can hardly be seen. Ryo flies back to the spirit village, where Latifa joyfully rushes into his arms. He shares with the elders the tales of his travels and his experiences in the Yagumo region. Latifa is thrilled to learn that she now technically has a grandmother and a cousin. The elders inquire how long Ryo plans to stay, and he explains that he can only remain for a few months before continuing his journey, though he promises to return sooner next time. Ryo also contemplates bringing a house with him using his spacetime cache, an idea Dominic finds fascinating. After being away for 2 or 3 long years, Ryo finally returns home. After catching up with the girls, he feels a deep sense of belonging. Latifa playfully invites him to join her for a bath, which causes some of the other girls to raise their eyebrows in amusement at the scandalous suggestion.
That's suspicious.
The next morning, Ryo wakes to find a naked girl in his bed. Thinking he must still be dreaming, he's bewildered. However, things quickly escalate when Sarah and the other girls enter his room and catch him in this compromising situation. Good luck trying to explain your way out of that, Ryo. The girls immediately demand an explanation for the mysterious girl's presence, but Rio is just as baffled as they are, unsure where to even begin. Sarah, feeling guilty, mistakenly believes she's somehow at fault for walking in on the situation. Finally, the girl in question wakes up, still groggy, and reveals that she is a spirit who has formed a contract with Haruto. Rio remembers her as the spirit who had appeared briefly in the past, taught him how to use spirit arts, and then vanished without a word, very much like a failed first date. The girl, however, lacks a name and asks Rio to give her one. The other girls take note that this spirit is addressing Rio as Haruto. They ask Rio about the name Haruto, and he tells them that he will explain this later. The girl communicates with him via telepathy, promising to keep his identity hidden from them. Still, she is insistent about wanting a name, though Rio asks her to be patient. Sarah suggests they take the spirit to the village elders and the spirit of the village, Lady Dryas, who might be more knowledgeable about the situation. Standing tall, revealing all her assets, the girl uses spiritual arts to clothe herself, and in that moment of awe, Rio instinctively names her Asia because her presence reminds him of spring. In the ancient language, Asia means spring. They bring Asia to the elders, who immediately call for a meeting. Dryas, an elder spirit, arrives, having sensed the birth of a new elevated spirit in the area. However, Asia is unable to remember much, which is unusual for a spirit of her caliber. Dryas asks Asia what kind of spiritual art she excels in, and to everyone's surprise, she bluntly replies, everything. To get a better understanding of her abilities, Rio and Asia head outside to engage in a sparring match. Rio tosses a rock into the air as a signal for the duel to begin, and as soon as it hits the ground, they start. The two clash in close combat, exchanging blows, and Rio is shocked to find that Asia has completely memorized his attack patterns and is able to counter every move effortlessly. Forced to retreat, Rio envelops himself in spiritual energy, only to find that Asia can do the same with equal proficiency. Their duel escalates, with both of them summoning devastating attacks, ice shards, fireballs, and even fierce tornadoes. The sheer force of their battle starts to cause more damage than anticipated, prompting Dryas to intervene and call it off before things get out of hand. Asia may not be the avatar, but her power is undeniable. She really is every element bender combined. Dryas takes Asia under her wing, vowing to teach her about the spirit world. The elders, too, welcome Asia into their community as though she had always been a part of the village. Over the next few weeks, Asia integrates into village life, learning from Dryas while helping with chores and other tasks. Meanwhile, Dominic proudly shows Rio the special house he has built for him, a house Rio can carry in his space-time cache. With the house complete, Rio decides it's time to pay his respects to the elders before leaving the village again. Before he departs, Sarah pulls him aside, expressing her and the other girls' acceptance of his decision to leave, but she requests that he spend a bit more time with Latifa before going. Reflecting on his time in the village, Rio realizes he has been so focused on his spiritual training that he has neglected his bond with Latifa. That evening, Latifa takes matters into her own hands. Determined to make the most of the time they have left, she sneaks into the bath while Rio is there, intent on washing his back. As they talk, Latifa reveals her real name is Endo, and Rio, in turn, shares that his real name is Haruto. Their conversation leads to a shocking realization: they were both involved in the same accident that brought them to this world. Fate, it seems, had a hand in their reunion. Apologizing for not being a better brother, Rio promises Latifa that he will return as soon as he can. The next morning, Rio prepares to leave the spirit village once more. Before he departs, Ursula gives him a spirit teleportation crystal, a one-way device that will allow him to return to the village whenever he needs to. Sora, meanwhile, hands him a special earring that will change the color of his hair, making it easier for him to travel discreetly while he's in the Strahl region. With all preparations complete, Rio asks the village to take care of Latifa in his absence. Latifa tearfully bids him farewell. Rio and Asia fly back to the Strahl region, both eager to see Celia again. Celia, standing in the middle of a courtyard, clutches the last letter she received from Rio, her thoughts clearly troubled. Her fiancé, Charles, interrupts her briefly, attempting to flirt before being called away by an attendant. Left alone again, Celia returns to the letter in her hand, wondering where Rio might be and what he is doing now. Meanwhile, Rio and Asia return to Beltrant, the capital of the Kingdom of Beltram. As soon as they arrive, Rio notices a bustling crowd, more people than usual filling the streets. Disguising his hair with Sora's earring, Rio approaches a local baker to inquire about the commotion. The baker informs him that a grand wedding is approaching. one for a noble family, House Arbor. Later, Rio and Isha infiltrate his old college in the hopes of finding Celia, but when they reach her laboratory, it is shockingly empty. It seems Celia either quit or took a leave of absence, leaving her work behind. Desperate for answers, Rio uses spiritual arts to extract the truth from one of the professors. To his horror, he learns that Celia is not only at the royal palace, she is engaged to marry his old rival, Charles. In Rio's absence, the kingdom of Beltram had suffered a catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Proxia kingdom. The House of Huguenot, held responsible for the debacle, was forced into exile, fleeing the capital in disgrace. In the power vacuum that followed, the House of Arbor rose to prominence. To cement their newfound influence, they arranged a marriage with the House of Clare. It was a marriage born of convenience and necessity, though the professor confides that he is unsure if the House of Clare fully supports the union. With the wedding set to take place the next day, Rio knows he has to hear Celia's thoughts on the matter directly. Asia, familiar with Celia's appearance, offers to help, volunteering to sneak into the palace, despite its tight security, to find her. While Asia goes in search of Celia, the young woman is having dinner with her father, Roland, and her fiancé, Charles. During the meal, Charles reassures Roland that the marriage between their two houses will send a clear message to their rivals: the kingdom of Beltram remains strong, despite recent setbacks. However, Charles also hints at the rumors swirling around, whispers that Roland and several other noble houses are still in contact with the exiled Huguenot family. Roland firmly denies any such accusations, but both men know that the marriage will serve to demonstrate Roland's loyalty to the House of Arbor. To sweeten the deal, Charles promises to appoint Roland as the director of the House of Arbor after the wedding. Roland, however, remains bitter. He despises the political gamesmanship of the nobility but knows there's no escape. He and Celia exchange hollow smiles, both resigned to their fate. Later, Asia successfully locates Celia's room and relays her position to Rio. Celia, alone in her bedroom, contemplates burning Rio's last letter. She had hoped, against all odds, that she would see him one last time before the wedding. Her prayers are answered when Rio suddenly enters her room. After 4 long years apart, they are finally reunited. Overcome with emotion, Celia tells him how much she's missed him, and Rio feels the same. She tries to play it off casually, suggesting they catch up over tea, but Rio cuts to the heart of the matter, asking her what she truly feels about the impending marriage. Celia, trying to put on a brave face, insists that it's time for her to marry. She even attempts to justify Charles's character, describing him as chivalrous and respectful of women, despite his numerous flaws. Rio, however, is unconvinced, and Celia senses his unease. She jokingly asks if he would be willing to whisk her away and elope with her. However, the moment passes, and she retracts the offer, claiming she was only kidding. Abruptly, she pushes Rio out of the room, urging him to leave and not attend the wedding. Giving him only a brief window to exit, she forces him out. Once alone, Celia breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably. Despite the pain, she is grateful she had the chance to see him one last time. Rio, though, remains deeply confused by her behavior, unsure of her true feelings. Asia reassures him, promising that they will get to the bottom of this. The next day, Rio, disguised as a noble named Rias, visits his old nemesis, Charles. While making polite conversation, Rio senses a powerful spirit nearby, though it vanishes just as quickly as it appeared. As the conversation continues, Charles orders one of his men to escort Rias to the wedding venue. Meanwhile, Celia steels herself for the ceremony, repeating to herself that she is nothing more than a doll, a pawn in the game of politics. Charles, ever the creep, summons her to meet his 6 other wives. The first wife, Tennies, wastes no time in reminding Celia that, as the 7th wife, she will be at the bottom of the hierarchy. Celia, trying to avoid conflict, accepts her place without complaint, unwilling to stir any trouble. Before the tension can escalate, the arrival of Princess Christina interrupts their gathering. Christina, happy to see Celia again, dismisses Tennies and the other wives, insisting on a private chat with her former professor. Once alone, Christina notices Celia's pallid complexion and asks about her well-being. Celia, putting on a brave front, explains that she didn't sleep well the night before. Christina, guilt-ridden over Celia's predicament, apologizes for her role in the matter. The princess knows that her family's weakness, along with the forced exile of the Huguenot family, has contributed to Celia being cornered into this loveless marriage. Christina, who has always admired Celia's grace and wisdom, promises to do anything within her power to help restore the smile she once adored. Celia thanks her for the sentiment and prays that Christina might one day be reunited with Princess Flora, her younger sister. Meanwhile, Charles and his right-hand man, Alfred, discuss security preparations for the lavish wedding. Charles, however, warns Alfred not to overdo it. He is the one in charge now, not Alfred. A few hours later, the grand wedding ceremony begins, heralded by a lavish and gaudy parade. Charles, ever the antagonist, continues to behave inappropriately, fawning over Celia with an air of possessiveness that only makes the situation more uncomfortable. As Celia's carriage approaches the palace, Asha speaks to her telepathically, telling her to look to the side. Celia, heart pounding, glances through the window and is stunned to see Rio among the crowd. Tears welled up in her eyes. Of all the people in the world, Rio was the last person she wanted to see her like this, trapped and helpless in a situation she cannot escape. As the carriage draws closer to the heavily guarded palace, a commotion erupts from the security detail. Rio, in a daring and reckless move, has broken through the barricades, launching a bold daytime raid to save the woman he cares about. Rio charges through the palace's security detail with alarming speed and deadly precision. Each movement is deliberate, and within moments, guards who were once confidently defending the grand parade lie defeated in his wake. Despite this, Charles, the arrogant noble, remains convinced that his elite soldiers can keep this lone attacker at bay. His confidence quickly shatters as Rio, undeterred, forces his way to the very front of the procession. With a single, powerful strike, Rio punches Charles square in the chest, knocking the wind out of him and causing him to stumble. The onlookers, nobles and commoners alike, gasp in shock as Rio, without hesitation, seizes Celia, effectively holding her hostage before the astonished crowd. Chaos erupts as guards scramble to control the situation. But Rio remains calm. In a low voice, he communicates with Celia through telepathy, assuring her that everything happening is just a calculated performance. He promises that no harm will come to her or the onlookers, aside from the dozens of guards he fought to get here. As Charles rides beneath Rio's boot, desperately trying to free himself, Rio presses down harder, making it clear he's in control of the situation. Once more, he asks Celia the question that burns in his mind. Does she truly want to go through with this marriage? He's prepared to stop it himself if she says no, ready to fight for her freedom, no matter the consequences. Despite the grim nature of the situation, Rio acknowledges that he may be acting arrogantly. He knows he's asking a lot of Celia, but he's tired of losing the people he cares about. Memories of his mother's death flood his mind, and he swears to himself that he won't let another tragedy happen, not this time. The gravity of the question weighs heavily on Celia, as she understands the marriage is a political necessity designed to secure the future of the kingdom. She hesitates, torn between duty and her own desires. With a heavy heart, she asks Rio if stopping the wedding is truly the right thing to do. Rio, unflinching, tells her that if it were the right thing, she wouldn't have such sorrow in her eyes. Celia looks into his eyes, conflicted yet moved by his words. She wants to know what Rio plans to do if she asks him to put an end to the wedding. His answer is simple and resolute. He'll take her far away, beyond the reach of these political machinations, where they can both be free. A small smile plays across Celia's lips as she softly responds, asking him to do exactly that, take her away. Without missing a beat, Rio announces to the stunned crowd that he will be abducting Celia, making it seem as if this daring escape is merely some grand illusion. In one fluid motion, he leaps into the air, dodging attacks from the remaining guards, and dances through the chaos with ease. Charles, now in a full-blown panic, demands that someone capture the mysterious kidnapper at once. Meanwhile, watching from the sidelines, Riz, secretly a powerful spirit user, recognizes the unique energy signature of Rio's spirit arts. He recalls Rio as the young man who had once bested a minotaur and now, intrigued, decides to test him. Riz fires a bolt of energy in Rio's direction, but Rio effortlessly deflects the attack. Impressed, Riz watches as Rio continues his escape, determined to see how far the young man can go. In the sky, an aerial unit of Griffin riders is dispatched to track and capture Rio, who now carries Celia in his arms as they fly through the city. Charles, humiliated and enraged, blames the entire debacle on his subordinate Alfred, refusing to take any responsibility. Meanwhile, Rio, keenly aware of the pursuit behind him, increases his speed, narrowly avoiding the Griffins closing in on him. Eventually, Rio lands in a narrow alleyway where Asia is waiting. He gently sets Celia down, assuring her that everything will be okay. Asia, knowing the plan, takes Celia into her care while Rio stays behind to draw the Griffin unit's attention away from them. As the guards swarm the alley, Rio launches himself back into the fray, creating a massive commotion in the streets to keep the focus on him. He engages in brutal hand-to-hand combat with the royal guards, taking down several of them, but it becomes increasingly difficult to fight without causing serious harm. Just as the battle intensifies, Alfred, known as the King's Sword and widely regarded as the strongest warrior in the kingdom, steps forward to challenge Rio. The two warriors face off, and for the first time that day, Rio feels a hint of apprehension. Alfred's skill and reputation precede him. He's not just any opponent. The duel begins, and to Alfred's surprise, Rio matches him blow for blow. They appear evenly matched, trading strikes with such precision that it becomes clear both fighters are in a league of their own. Alfred quickly realizes that Ryo, despite his skill, is purposely avoiding using the sharp edges of his blades. Feeling insulted, Alfred decides to end the fight decisively. With a grim determination, Alfred summons his noble phantasm, Clarent Blood Arthur, and unleashes a devastating blast of energy from his sword. The explosion rocks the battlefield, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. As the smoke clears, Alfred searches for any sign of his opponent, but Ryo is nowhere to be found. Frustrated and unwilling to let such a powerful adversary slip through his fingers, Alfred orders his men to sweep the entire area, leaving no stone unturned. Back in the palace, the nobility is in a state of complete disarray. Celia, who anxiously awaited Ryo's return, finally sees him again. His clothes are torn and tattered from the battle, but he's alive. Overcome with relief, Celia rushes towards him, only to trip in her haste. Ryo catches her, and for the first time, they feel a glimmer of hope for their future together. However, before they can enjoy the moment, Aisha, standing nearby, suddenly experiences a terrible premonition. Beams of light shoot up from the ground, and Aisha urgently pleads with Ryo to save them. In a grassy field not far away, 3 Japanese students, bewildered and confused, struggle to understand where they've been transported. Their confusion is cut short as they're kidnapped by bandits and thrown into slave carts. Ryo, hearing the commotion and recognizing Japanese voices, rushes to the scene. He swiftly dispatches the bandits, freeing the students from captivity. They're stunned to hear Ryo speaking Japanese, and one of them, named Masato, reveals that they have one more companion who was captured separately. Ryo, determined to save them all, moves towards the final slave cart. As he approaches, his heart skips a beat. The girl inside is none other than Miharu, the love of his life from his previous world. The story reaches a climactic end as Ryo and Miharu are finally reunited, setting the stage for the next chapter of their journey. On the bright side, Season 2 is coming within this week. Make sure to stay tuned and let me know if you'll like me to continue with the series. That's it for today's anime recap. Like and subscribe for more, and feel free to check out this other video on the left.